Here we have a 2021 Tarmac SL7. Super nice racy road bike. It's got a lot of cool features. Integrated cable routing here to kind of keep it really clean and aerodynamic. This bike's in really good shape, but we did notice a few things going on with it. We're gonna replace the bottom bracket. We had a lot of vibration and a little bit of play in the bottom there. One issue with these bikes that we have to check for on all of them from this era is a recalled steer tube here. Our system flags any bikes that have any kind of a recall that could happen. Every morning when we get new bikes in, we go through the list and kind of see which bikes might have a recall. So when the inspection goes through, we flag it and send it to our master mechanics and consumables departments. And they'll dig deeper into that and make sure that it's been resolved. If it hasn't, we take care of it. If it has, then we make sure that we mark that. So if the customer ever asks further on down the line, we can give them a confident answer that it has been addressed.
So with these SL7s, there was an issue with damage happening at the steerer tube. And so the recall involves using a new expander plug, as well as a new compression ring in here that's got a shim in it. So we're gonna open this guy up and make sure that the recall has been performed already. And if not, we'll get it the right parts, make sure it's ready to rock. The first thing I'm gonna look for here is that the expander plug has red anodizing on the top of it, because all of the replacement parts will have that red anodized top. I'm seeing that there, so that looks good. The next thing we gotta look at is gonna be this compression ring. Compression ring is this top bit in here. And when I'm looking at it, I can see that there is a metal shim between the steerer and the compression ring, which means that the recall has been performed. This bike is good to go.
Like service rating has called for a bottom bracket. Usually there's either gonna be excessive play or it's just simply worn out. The bearings are gonna be really rough. So the first step, as always, I get the wheels off of the bike, give myself a little more room to work with so I'm not fighting around the wheel. So I'll go ahead and move the chain out of the way. Pretty easy on this one since it's just a 1x. Grab my 8mm wrench and remove the bottom bracket. Pull the crank out, we can see just how gritty it is on the inside here. That only bodes well for the bearings themselves. While it's in my hand, go ahead and clean off all the old grease and grit. I'll grab a 2.5mm hex wrench and go ahead and reset the preload ring on this as well. This is how you make sure that you can get on these dub cranks and a lot of other 30mm spindles. Sets your preload and helps remove any lateral play due to discrepancies in spindle length and bottom bracket shell widths and all that. So nothing is perfect. Well, we got that out of the way. I can go ahead and find my tool to remove the old bottom bracket shell. This can be a bit of a guess and check. You see in my drawer here, I already have 4 different tools to remove bottom brackets and bottom bracket shells, and we have a complete drawer full of about 30 other tools. This one's really easy because it's a BSA bottom bracket. That means that this one actually just has a threaded interface here that gets the bearings into the frame. Another common one that you'll see, the industry is kind of moving away from it at the moment, is the press fit bottom bracket. It was a lot easier, cheaper to manufacture carbon frames especially, without having to worry about cutting threads into any of the shells. So between that and a little bit of a weight consideration, the industry moved toward that, but they are a little finicky, they can be creep prone, and the industry is largely moving back toward threaded bottom brackets. long as I've got everything exposed, I'm going to clean up the area around here. It's a good opportunity to inspect inside as well, especially in the case of this one where not only is it one by, but it's also an access bike, wireless shifting. A lot of the holes and ports in the frame that would usually have a cable or housing going through it don't exist anymore. So in this case, we do have a couple holes that could potentially let in a little bit more dirt than usual. So we just like to inspect in here a little bit more carefully, make sure the threads are good and clean. If they do get damaged, you can grab a tool and just what we call chase the threads. That just helps clean them out and refresh them. In this case, everything's looking pretty good, so I can go ahead and grab my new bottom bracket. In this case, we're working with a SRAM dub bottom bracket. And so that will go hand in hand with the SRAM dub cranks to be a perfect fit with the chain set. The bearing we took out was a nice one. It's a Kugel branded ceramic bottom bracket, but the way SRAM designs their systems, it doesn't necessarily work perfectly with the crank set. In this case, I can go onto Google and search for SRAM's tech docs. SRAM uses some spacers on one side or the other to adjust for the different configurations. So they have a nice tech doc that I can use to go ahead and look up which spacers I need to put where. We know that we're dealing with a road BSA bottom bracket. And in this case, because it's road, it's going to be a 68mm wide shell. Double check that the spindle is just the standard spindle, which it is. And so this is telling me that on the drive side, the right side, I need a single 3mm spacer. So I can go ahead and set that with my crank over there, ready to go. And now I can go ahead and reinstall my new bottom bracket. I like to just apply a little bit of grease to the threads. I do this by hand, and that's a really good way to make sure that you don't get anything cross-threaded, make sure that there isn't excessive dirt or damaged threads from the previous bottom bracket. And if it threads in by hand really nice and easily, you know you're in a good spot. Once I get that close, ready to go, I can go ahead and grab my torque wrench and get this tightened down all the way. The torque spec for these ones is printed right on the shell. Makes it really easy, you don't have to look it up or guess. It's 50 Newton meters, just like the crank bolt. 50 Newton meters. And we'll go ahead and tighten this down until it clicks. All you need is once. You don't need to check it again. Clean that up. Got our click, we're ready to go. And final step before I put this all the way back in the drawer is you do want to make sure to reset your torque wrench. Now that we've got that, it's time to reinstall the crank. So the BSA bottom bracket threads, they are going to be opposite threaded on the drive sides. So lefty tighty, righty loosey. Standard righty tighty, lefty loosey threads on the non-drive side. And the reasoning behind that is to make sure that the bottom bracket shell does not unthread itself while you're pedaling. It's the way the crank turns on the drive side. If it was normally threaded, it would potentially cause the threads to back out. That's actually a problem with the other threaded bottom bracket standard, which is Italian. And that one is standard threads on both sides. If you don't Loctite those or honestly over torque them a little bit, they have a habit of unthreading themselves and binding against the crank. As mentioned before, we have that 3mm spacer behind the crank on this drive side. So what I like to do here is just, once I've got the bolt snug, I like to spin the crank a little bit, push it in, hear that click, make sure that that spacer is actually seated into the groove on the bottom bracket shell dust cover. From here, we will go ahead and grab our torque wrench once again. This crank bolt also torques down to 54 Newton meters. Crank that down until you hear the click. The final step here is to tighten this preload ring down. That's going to remove any lateral play and set the bearings correctly. I haven't seen it explicitly, but usually with a preload or a wave washer, you're going to have at least one of the bearing sets be an angular contact. And for those to work correctly, you actually need a little bit of lateral load to seat the bearings correctly. So once I have that snug, I can tighten down the bolt here, which pinches the collar on the threads and keeps it from moving. You just need to go until the gap right there is just about touching. And from there, give the crank a few spins. Just make sure it goes freely and it doesn't bind or stick anywhere. This isn't going to spin forever at the moment. The dub bottom brackets are really well sealed, and when they're brand new, seals do tend to be a little bit more snug. So they're going to have a slight bit more drag. You're not really losing much, and it will free itself up over the next couple hundred miles of riding, and then you'll have a perfect setup. So from there, now that I'm happy with that, I'm just going to do a final check. Make sure there's no knocking in here, no more lateral play, and we're good to go.